Without further ado, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. Oh, let me bring up your slides too. I'm so sorry.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here at the CFLHFES.
Nice. I'm impressed.
Okay, yeah. Well, I like the cadence that you used to do that. So I had a few things I was going to talk to you guys about.
There you go.
And full disclosure, I spend most of my time explaining complicated ideas to decision makers who want 90-second summaries. So, and also, I'm not a human factors specialist. Thank you for the credit, for extending me the credit, for assuming I know anything about human factors. I know a lot about training evaluation. I know a lot about personnel selection. But if you start talking to me about interfaces, I'm just going to nod and back away. So I've got real gaps in my knowledge. But one of the things that wasn't on my list of things to talk about was a recruitment drive for my community. But thank you, Amanda, for that. So before I get into a discussion about what NAWCTSD is, what our mission is, and I'm going to keep that short. It's not going to get boring. I'm going to talk about Team Orlando, and I'm going to gauge your eyelids. And if you can take 30 seconds about how we fit into the bigger picture, you'll get that much. But if I can talk about it for longer, I will. And then I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that we face, or some of the big rocks that we're working on in using some emerging technologies. Our current work on VR, AR, and mixed reality, our current taskers and challenges in LVC training, and our attempt to bring the Navy into the fold using enterprise analytic tools. Inside Navy networks, let me tell you, that is no small feat. I mean, you guys talk about what's possible using the cutting edge. We're just dreaming about plugging in two computers from 10 years ago and approximating what can be done in the private sector. But that's all just the preview, okay? First, I got my first assignment from Amanda. Okay. I am a naval aerospace experimental psychologist. We are a cross-disciplinary community of psychologists from human factors backgrounds. You guys really make up the lion's share of the community. There are like 30 to 35 of us at any given time. And the cool kids on the bus who beat up all the other nerds are always the human factors people. We've got, the second tier is probably the IO people. We have plenty of, we have lots of neuro guys. We have, every once in a while we'll let in a clinician, but I don't like to talk about that. And we do interdisciplinary work in a variety of places around the country. What we tell people, if you want to be an AEP, you've got to be in relatively good shape. You've got to be able to pass a flight physical. You've got to be willing to learn to fly. You've got to be comfortable in the water, because we will try to drown you during the training. It sounds a lot nastier than it is, but just making it through basic swim quals. And if you can do all those things, we will teach you to learn to fly and give you an assignment at a variety of places where you can do work on various areas related to naval aviation, solving problems. I've spent, 10 out of the 18 years I've been in active duty working on personnel selection. I wasn't going to talk about that, and if I talk for more than 30 minutes, I'm going to get the hook. So you'll have to come back for the sequel if you want me to talk about selection testing. But we also have 5 or 6 jobs within the Naval Air Systems Command where people are doing human factors work on acquisition programs, changing the weapon systems that we are designing today to ensure that they are not as gooned up as the weapon systems we have fielded for the last 30 to 50 years. We also have a variety of billets in science and technology program management, jobs at the Office of Naval Research Lab, one billet that's on and off at DARPA, where senior level members of our community control budgets and make resource decisions and fund people like you to build the things that we really need. It's a really cool job. I never thought I was going to go. I never considered it in grad school. I was always kind of a fight the power, like don't trust the government guy. But I needed a job, and my wife found an ad on Monster.com that said the Navy was looking for IO psychologists that were willing to learn to fly, and I'd just been shooting my mouth off about how cool it would be to fly. And I didn't even think it was real. But I came in, did the 3 years I expected to do as my period of obligated service, and it was way more fun than I ever dreamed it would be possible. And now, next thing I knew, I'm almost at a pension. So it's an intensely rewarding job. We are always looking for people. In this economy, I know you got no shortage of jobs, or job offers, and we're not going to pay you very much. I think starting salary is maybe like 65. So if you do it, you're doing it because you enjoy the work and because you love service to your country. But we're never going to make you rich. Anyway, but that's the end of my commercial, so please keep us in mind. Those of you that are at or near completion, I'm looking at you. You got a job yet? I got some people I want you to talk to. Oh. All right. Thanks, Amanda.
Sorry.
Okay. Anyway, well, that's what we do. So please remember us when you are trying to decide what you want to be, what you want to do with your time. We would love to talk to you. All right. So that's the end of the commercial. So I came here to talk to you about what our command is. Now, I know a bunch of you guys are already funded by researchers within NAWCTSD, but I'm counting on maybe you haven't heard a briefing about the overall mission of NAWCTSD, at least I'm hoping, because that's what I'm going to talk about for a couple of minutes. All right, so what we do, I'm not going to read the mission statement aloud, but we're basically an acquisition command. We have about $1.5 billion a year that moves through our command. Our principal reason for existing is to contract, design, field, acquire, and sustain the trainers that we're using, not just for aviation, but for the surface community. And you can have these slides. You don't have to photograph them. They're distribution A. You're welcome to a copy. For the surface community, for the subsurface community, for special warfare, and for a variety of other communities. We're doing lots of work for the fleet's training requirements writ large at the entry level in a project called Ready Relevant Learning. It's one of the, it's got a it's congressional. It's the equivalent of, I'm blanking on the acronym I'm looking for. But it's the equivalent of the ACAT-1 program. It's funded at hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's taken up a quarter of our workforce at this point. But we're doing lots of good with it. But the point of that discussion is to make it clear we build things for all communities and all enterprises within the Navy and for other services too. Even though we've got A in our title, we've got an airplane in our logo, but about a quarter of our work is for the aviation fleet. All right, other things within here. We design new toys. We contract and build them. We keep them running. We've got in-service engineers at 46 locations around the world, keeping trainers that are 1 year old, that are 10 years old, that are, I forgot about that. Do I need to stay in one spot? Okay, that are 50 years old in some cases, up and running. Those in-service engineers, those guys are the salt of the earth, insert your secondary acronym about how valuable they are, but they really keep us running. And we build solutions that are needed for training the individual, for training groups, and that are used throughout the entire force. Like Ready Relevant Learning is a good example of that. All right, so we build things, we evaluate them, we support training systems, we build things for our partners or other services, and here we've got our get out of jail free slide, get out of jail free clause to perform such other functions and tasks as directed by higher authority, because we get asked to do some crazy stuff that that is not within the purview of our stated mission, but we do things, we do them well, so our mission is what our bosses say it is. All right, ostensibly, this command, am I okay here? As long as I don't go over to the left, am I going to be within the bounds of?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so I'm sorry, I'm not coming over there. All right. This is not everything we do, but this is the biggest chunk of what our focus areas are. We try to keep relevant fielded devices up and running. I mentioned our in-service engineers. We've got a lot of trainers spread all over the world that we keep up and running, and we're trying to build new capabilities that don't yet exist. We talk a great deal, and we have one of our areas of principal mission is live virtual constructive training. Otherwise, also a subset of that is integrated warfighting capability. Building solutions that allow existing systems to share data in ways they previously weren't able to do, and allowing simulators and live weapon systems and non-player characters to be shared in the same training environment. Now, I'll talk more about that in a little while. And also building lifelong learning solutions. I mentioned the Ready Relevant Learning program. We've got a portfolio of intelligent tutoring and adaptive training tools. Most of those are designed to meet the solutions of a micro community. We'll build an adaptive trainer that does a fantastic job for submarine periscope operators. Well, that community of 150 sailors is really, really grateful for the solution that we built after 5 years of work and $8 million, but we have 283,000 other sailors that need training solutions. So one of the things that we're doing with Ready Relevant Learning is working on building a learning architecture that can, to accompany that, all the content that we're building for 83 different enlisted communities, to track and map what they have developed, what skills they developed, how they tend to atrophy over time, and build a map of the acquisition and retention of lifelong learning. And we're also moving into cybersecurity. Now, our principal mission is not to keep cyber systems or keep IT systems safe from cyber, but there are gigantic gaps in the cyber training environment. Not only do the cyber operators who play the good guys or the bad guys need to be trained how to do their jobs, there's a much bigger community of just ordinary guys who use computers, who we just call others in this parlance, who need to learn to recognize the signs of a potential cyber attack, to learn what not to do. Great. The worst thing you can do is reboot your computer if somebody is trying to get into your system. I don't know why that is, but smart people have told me that that's the last thing I should do. So one of the things that we're working on are cyber capabilities to meet the needs of that population, and to also to emulate cyber effects on existing simulator systems. That's a really neat capability that we've been able to use out in the Joint Force. All right, so that's what our command is. It's 1,400 people on a base that's smaller than most farms. The second smallest base in the country, as a matter of fact. I'm not sure which is the smallest one. Now we are we're only one service, but you may have noticed you also got Army guys and Marine guys and Air Force guys walking around here. They are part of Team Orlando. We're the biggest command in town with, I don't like to brag, 36 active duty people on base, but about 1,400 civilians. But we've also got the Army's Program Executive Officer for Simulation Training and Instrumentation. They move about, I think, $2 billion a year through there. The Marine Corps' Program Manager for Training Systems. They build and field the same kinds of training systems that we do, but primarily for the Marine Corps' ground force. That's us. And then the Air Force Agency for Modeling and Simulation is principally a contracting shop. They're not an acquisition command, they're not building things or contracting for things, contracting the development and sustainment of new tools on site. But all services are represented here, and we've got a variety of partners. I won't list them all, but the ADL CoLab, the High-Tech Corridor, we're working more and more closely with colleagues in the Orlando Economic Partnership, as well as VA SimLearn, UCF, love you guys. And I'm not going to read all these, but it's a big partnership and always growing. We are part of a multi-layered solution. We've got the government. Okay, we've got military people, but we are augmented by academic and industry and nonprofit partners, and we get pretty good leverage with local, state, and even federal government representatives. They're able to help us by making policy decisions and changing laws that make it easier for us to do or keep the doors open. Our base is just an increasingly improbable story. We're 40 acres that had 2 buildings on it 50 years ago, and through a series of increasingly unlikely circumstances, now we've got leased space in 5 buildings around the base that we occupy with colleagues, with partners. That's allowed us to grow beyond the constraints of our base. Okay, all right. I get excited when I talk about Team Orlando, and that's the last thing you guys want to hear about. So that's the end of the Team Orlando lecture, with one caveat. Because you're all human factors people, I wanted to show you the slide I'm most proud of in terms of its ink to information ratio. Okay, what this is telling you is the kinds of events that we host across the year in terms of making technology and new capabilities available to a wide audience, a slightly narrower audience, a series of contractors, getting our contractors to show us the tools they have built, and the same thing with an industry capability day. Down here, we're showing you the periodicity with which these events happen, and I just love this slide. I realize you guys probably don't need to know this. You already know that ITSEC happens. You probably know that the Training Systems Integrated Symposium, Industry Symposium happens, but a guy named John Grigsby, who's not a human factors guy at all, built this slide for our skipper, and those of us in the Human Systems Department were just nerding out. Wow, this is the coolest slide I've ever seen. Who are you? Anyway, so if you also need to know when things are happening that we sponsor, You can thank John for that. Okay, so that's it for the housekeeping. I was going to move on to the kinds of things that we actually build next. All right. I don't have to tell you guys that training in simulation is desirable, is more desirable than training in live environments in a whole variety of situations, and that training in traditional operational flight trainers, the big fancy motion-based simulators that we use to train, that we've traditionally referred to as simulators until about 10, 15 years ago. They are really, really cheap compared to live aircraft, but they're still not that cheap. I mean, you can spend $20, $30 million building a 6 degree of freedom motion-based simulator, and we have. We've got fantastic trainers for the P8A in Jacksonville that we maintain. They're part of our regular tour circuit, and they're gorgeous to see, but those things are not cheap. Another thing that we're spending no small amount of time and attention on behalf of OpNav, which is the CNO's office basically, and the funding agencies that report directly to him, and the Chief of Naval Air Training, and Fleet Forces Command, and all these stakeholders with multiple stars on their shoulders are helping them understand where and when it's safe to use less expensive, more technology-driven solutions like mixed reality. All right, so here is where a slide that I should have deleted, because I know you guys all know this inside and out, and I can't believe I got my public affairs guy to approve a slide that is blatantly ripping off a Marvel movie and The Matrix. But the slide's approved. At any rate, this is at the point at which I usually explain to my lay audiences what the differences are between VR and AR as they exist along the continuum of mixed reality. All right, I'm happy to explain it if anybody wants to hear me talk about it, but I'm willing to bet you guys know this better than I do. Okay, thank you for the polite nod. Okay, all right, some of the things that we are working on with regard to AR and VR training effectiveness. I've got in the lower right corner here just a subset. This isn't everything. This was obsolete within a month of being written, but some of the things that we are building or have built are for the Seahawk community. We've built an augmented reality-based, tablet-based pre-flight checklist trainer in response to fleet needs that we got from NAS Mayport. We're working on building a virtual reality helmet display tracking system that teaches weapons officers how to use their heads-up displays to track weapons delivery. We have, in response to, I got to tell the story about the two Marines, I guess. Some of the best innovation happens not because we, as advocates for technology, find the right door to knock on, but sometimes it happens synergistically in the opposite direction. Like a flag officer will hear, "Oh my God, you mean I could buy a VR headset? Why has no one told me this?" The Chief of Naval Air Training is the guy who owns undergraduate flight training for all naval aviators. Anybody, basically elementary school and high school. We have you fly in a cheap, simple, safe airplane, then we put you in a more complicated airplane that's harder to use, and then we send you to college at the fleet replacement squadron level, and we have you fly your fleet operational platform. Well, the guy who owns elementary school and high school, basically, the Chief of Naval Air Training, his acronym is CNATRA, we call him Sinatra. I realize that acronym doesn't make sense if you haven't been using it for 15 years, and I just want to explain it because I know I'm going to slip into it during this conversation. Sinatra had a couple of Marines work in his training pipeline who were not doing well. They were both flunking out because they weren't thinking well in 3 dimensions. They were having big problems in some specific parts of the curriculum. And what these guys did was went down to Best Buy and built themselves a couple of networkable VR trainers, just using COTS hardware. And they bought the prepared visual system. They bought a couple of aftermarket after-action review tools that they could use. And these guys just practiced in their garage and raised their scores from 11th percentile to 60th percentile. And so on graduation day, they were like, "How did you guys do this?" And they said, "Look at our fancy stuff." And 10 minutes later, my boss's phone rings, and it's Admiral Harris, and he's like, "I want these everywhere in 10 minutes." And we were like, "I don't think you do. We want you to use them, but it's going to take us longer to contract these than it would for technology to make them obsolete." But in a huge win for us, we discovered that the last time somebody had a great idea about moving new technology out to the field was 15 years ago, when the same thing happened with Microsoft Flight Sim. Some kid who was in trouble got himself a copy of it, practiced his butt off, did great. The admiral at the time said, "This is fantastic, I want this everywhere right now." And we bought 1,000 copies of it, and we stuck it at every training air wing, and they all sat there and gathered dust because nobody knew when to use them or how to use them or thought about what the usability or user interest would be. So we said, we're not going to do that again. We want to see VR integrated everywhere that it can be, but these things have strengths and they have giant liabilities in their current form. So we said, here's what we can do. We happen to have 4 of these 15-year-old microsims sitting in closets at your Jet Wing 1 and your Jet Wing 2. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to unplug the keyboards. We're going to unplug the monitors. We're going to plug in VR headsets to them. We're going to plug in sticks as peripherals for where the mouse goes, and we're going to replace the visual system with Lockheed's Prepared. And poof, it's the same computer. We just updated all the peripherals, and voila, now you've got VR trainers. And we got to do it in 30 days instead of the 9 months it might otherwise have taken us to contract it, because we're the government and that's how we roll. So we were really proud of ourselves. Like, we got this done in 30 days. We're patting ourselves on the back. Admiral Harris he wanted to know why it hadn't been 11 days. So that was our reward for that little piece of innovation. And he said he wanted many more copies very, very soon. Okay. The point of that little side trip is that we have virtual reality trainers, 9 copies of them as a matter of fact, 4 each in our 2 jet training air wings, where student pilots fly the T-45, basically our baby jet, and then we have 1 in Pensacola where student NFOs fly the same aircraft as weapons officers. We are also in the process of conducting a cross-device training effectiveness evaluation. I say we like I'm the one doing it, but we've got a team of just fantastic human factors people, both in uniform and a cadre of civilian scientists, working with scientists at Sinatra, scientists in Pensacola, in a bunch of IO people at the Naval Aerospace and Medical Institute, evaluating the effectiveness using data, not just using a little user feedback. We're running hundreds of students through these devices and measuring what they say about how well they work, how well the students perform in the training, and then downstream how well they perform in follow-on training. So we're actually going to have some level 2 data. I know, pretty badass, wouldn't you say? Anyway, so that study should be completed, substantively completed within the next 2 months. We're pretty excited about it because when we go to our resource sponsors and say, you should invest in this technology, they say, where's the evidence that it works? And we say, you haven't given us the money to generate the evidence that it works. And they say, until you give me that evidence, you're not getting any money, and nothing happens for 10 years. Okay, but the Air Force has invested very, very heavily in virtual reality in a program called Pilot Training Next. They are training large groups of student pilots through the first phase of Air Force training, using heavy reliance on VR trainers, using much the same hardware setup that we used. But they are being allowed to embrace risk at a level that makes my toes curl, because the prospect of putting a Navy student pilot in a training environment where we haven't evaluated where we haven't mitigated the risk of a training mishap to the nth degree possible, because aviation is a high reliability enterprise. One mishap, we've got to keep our mishap rates below 1 every 100,000 hours. At any rate, the Air Force is able to embrace risk at a level that we are never going to be allowed to embrace. But the good news for us is the precedent they have set about using these technologies at a level that means we won't be 30 years behind the times, we'll only be 22 years behind the times, really helps us out. Okay, all right, that was a lot longer than I meant to spend on that quadrant. We also have done, in addition to this training effectiveness assessment, is it on the window?
Yep.
Okay, what about now? We also have some researchers who have spent the last several years conducting comparisons between virtual reality environments and just monitor-based virtual environments for learning effectiveness. Now, the decision makers, stakeholders who come to town are not particularly interested in this evidence that took us 4 years to generate. But every once in a while we'll get a cadre of scientists who don't have any money who come to town and want to know what evidence do we have that our training devices work as well or better than traditional counterparts. Well, Dr. Cheryl Johnson has been blood, sweat, and tears into answering these questions for the last several years, and she's finally got some results that we can hit people over the head with. I'm very happy to report. Okay, the last thing I wanted to say on this slide is news that will not be news to you, but this is what we typically remind decision makers of when we are asked to help them embrace the latest shiny thing because they think it's likely to be a training panacea. We have a lot of unanswered questions about where mixed reality solutions are going to work. It's going to depend on what level of interactivity you think is going to be sustainable, what level of immersion is required for the training goals that you're using. We don't really understand as effectively as we should whether or not VR is even as effective as monitor-based training, or where it might be more effective. For some flight skills, it seems like it's likely to yield much better results than for others if some basic usability problems can be fixed. Like formation flight, this would be a short explanation, I promise, but the trainers that we have right now, the ones that we've been using for 20 or 30 years, have the widest field of view we could accommodate at the time. But if you have to turn your head more than 140 degrees, as you often do when you're flying with somebody right behind you, you can't really see them, which is a giant limitation of the training environment. Well, the ability to move your head in 360 degrees makes VR solutions ideal for training formation flight, provided you can overcome the other limitations of the system, and that there's no jitter, that the system is fluid, that you have adequate mechanisms available for the user to interact with all the interfaces and the instruments and the buttons they're going to have to push. All right, I'm talking to human factors people, sorry. All right, we also need to evaluate the kinds of questions about for which populations are these devices going to be effective. I've talked about basically our kindergarten and high school students, the people who don't know how to fly yet, as guinea pigs that both services are using for this evaluation. But the question of whether or not we could be using limited VR devices to help expert pilots rehearse skills they've already acquired is a completely different question than the one that we've been tasked with evaluating, whether or not we can help noobs with initial skill acquisition using this kind of technology. All right, so that's my series of gripes about where we are with mixed reality. We also have a lot to do with live virtual constructive training. Is this a new term to anybody? It's okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. We throw this acronym around like it's IBM, but a lot of people aren't, it's something people should be really familiar with. But basically, this is it in a nutshell. We have a problem we need to solve in that the training goals, the training needs that we have for our fleet aviators and some of our surface vessels require larger exercises with more vessels than we have room for, than we can keep floating or in the air at any given time. So we don't have the hardware we need to do it. What's more, we often need to rehearse tactics that we don't want our friends in China and Russia and all kinds of other places to see us rehearsing. We have a variety of reasons why we need to be able to do more training using simulators in conjunction with live aircraft. Wouldn't it be great if we had a mechanism by which a pilot in a real aircraft who is live could share data, including a radar picture, weapons data interchange, Link 16 pictures, that kind of stuff, with a human being sitting in a simulator so that they could rehearse as though they're flying a formation. They could, one could play the aggressor against the other. They could work together on a common mission package. The person in the simulator, a human being sitting in a simulator, is referred to as a virtual training entity. If I need 100 bad guys that all fly in predictable patterns like the video games that I played when I was a kid, those non-player entities, whether they move in predictable patterns or not, are called constructive entities. In order to do this right, we need to be able to share data among make-believe entities that move in plausible ways, and we've got a variety of systems that we field and sustain, but the Air Force has got their cool toys. We have our own. NGTS, Next Generation Threat System, is the tool of choice for the aviation community. Non-player characters with human beings sitting in sims, sharing data about the non-player characters and the guys in the sims with operators in live aircraft and live ships. That is the vision. It is incredibly difficult to do, in terms of moving the electrons and pixels where you need them to connect the data, before you even consider what the training challenges are involved with this. But this is the future. We have to be able to. If I had this select open the whole. Oh, that's part of the picture. Crazy. At any rate, so LVC is the problem that we're working to solve, and it's the greatest need that is one of the highest priorities for the fleet. Building the ability to share data where you need it to go, the ability to define what your training goals, training requirements are for these kinds of multi-level environments, and the ability to move data securely. Because a lot of these entities, a lot of the aircraft, they have top secret stuff on them. Well, a lot of the simulators they're sharing their operational environment with don't have any secret stuff, but we still need to be able to exchange data among the two. And that high side, low side connection is not easy to do. It's burning a lot of time and a lot of money verifying that we understand how to make that happen. So, you already know what's on this slide. This is old hat for you. You know what LVC stands for. But the role of our command in solving this problem for the fleet, the Chief of Naval Operations, CNO, another new acronym for you, has designated the Fleet Forces Command, another 4-star, as his executive agent for LVC. Now, our command is part of NAVAIR, Naval Air Systems Command. We got a 3-star who controls us. That 3-star has designated our command as the training lead for LVC enterprise-wide. So remember I said how hard it's going to be to figure out what the metrics are supposed to look like to train an individual operator in an LVC environment. God help an air package. God help a system where some of the operators are in simulators and some of them are in live aircraft and they're interacting with constructive entities. Well, the good news for us is that we get to solve all those problems for the fleet, and it's going great. It's a big problem. It's going to take a very long time to work out. So, I've already covered what it stands for, why we need it, the kinds of problems. I didn't mention, we're also flying the wings off our aircraft since we've pretty much been continually at war since 2001. So, another reason why we desperately need LVC solutions. And I've already touched on many of these, but we need to ensure that we can move data where we need it to, that we have mechanisms by which our LVC trainees can share information, just communications where they need to, that we have the right hardware and data centers in place, that we can do this over time. Our first forays into LVC, where we'd spend a couple $1 million plugging a bunch of simulators in together, share data, prove it could be done, we'd slap ourselves on the back, and then 2 weeks we're up and we had to plug everything and go home. And, we had to show for it. We had a proof of concept, but absolutely nothing sustainable. So we're building sustainable enterprise solutions now. We need to define what the heck we're doing and why. We need to do it super fast, and we need to be able to share classified data with unclassified entities. Or share the unclassified portion of classified data with unclassified entities. I'm getting filmed. Yeah, that's what I want. That's what I want on YouTube. All right. We are also working on enterprise analytics. Now we've got a team called the Nerds team. Is anybody working with Nelson Lerma and his team? Since he's a grad here, I assume he knows all of you. Okay. Well, he only graduated like 4 or 5 years ago. In the metrics of my gray hair, that sounds like you should all know him. I guess that's an entire tenure for grad students. But at any rate, he's rating your college for people with data analytics capability on a regular basis. Every time I go into a shop, I see 4 new 20-something people all working to solve enterprise analytics-driven problems. Now, what we've done, thanks in large part to Dr. Lerma, that's so innovative is we've got a high-powered computer of our own with a 7 petaflop capability. I understand it's good, but I don't know. It's apparently world-class, and it allows us, as part of the data stack that we maintain with multiple sites around the naval aviation enterprise, to look at data stacks of sufficient size with sufficient processing power that we can find things in those data stacks that wouldn't otherwise be possible. We've got people that understand what are in the data. We've got people who understand where the data are coming from, and we've got permissions to access all the right data, which have allowed the NERDS team and the larger naval aviation enterprise to, by and large, solve the hypoxia problem that has plagued the Navy for 3 or 4 years. Okay, 45 minutes in. All right, I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes on hypoxia. Okay, you're going to be my Nielsen rating. Okay, when I lose you, we're done talking about hypoxia. All right. But a few years ago, an epidemic emerged across the Navy and across the Marine Corps of pilots reporting symptoms of oxygen deprivation at altitude, which is hypoxia. It happens, I mean, we all get trained on what it feels like, and it's a good way to get yourself killed, because once you're up above 20,000 feet, or especially 30,000 feet, you take your mask off or lose access to pure oxygen for even a few seconds, and you can lose functionality and lose consciousness. Well, there is no objective way to evaluate the presence of hypoxia symptoms. We can evaluate the presence of contaminants if we have the right equipment in the aircraft. Guess what? We didn't. We can evaluate the presence of the symptoms based only on self-reports. Well, guess what the best way to induce mass hysteria about a subjectively reported phenomenon is? Publicize it. Now, I am absolutely not saying on camera that anybody ever intentionally suggested they were experiencing a physiological event or symptoms of hypoxia when they weren't. But I will say people are susceptible to the power of suggestion. And when there was an epidemic in our training air wings where one service was reporting rampant incidents of hypoxia and the other service was reporting 0, and they were flying the same aircraft day in, day out, I'm thinking there might be, a hysterical component to these reporting levels. But regardless of that, what we were able to do, or what the enterprise analytics team was able to do, because of the stack that they built, is build mechanisms for identifying problematic aircraft, ones that were not only had experienced rapid overpressurization or sudden contamination, or even just depressurization, all of which are different combinations of problems that can result in a physiological episode which disables a pilot. They are building tools now that even predict which aircraft are going to result in the next hypoxic, next physiological episode. They've done some really amazing work. Right now, our analytics team is trying to move into problems beyond physiological events, because we've got this giant investment in infrastructure and a team that has these amazing capabilities. And the sun's not going to rise and set on hypoxia forever, so that the team is branching out into solving other kinds of problems. All right. One more slide. You guys are doing fantastic. I want to thank you for that. The last thing I want to talk about, and this is actually a dated model that I'm showing you, but another of the problems that we regularly work on are how to measure human performance. Now, what I'm showing you here is a proficiency model built by one of our teams about, I guess, 4 years ago now, that we used to evaluate skill acquisition and atrophy within the tactical aviation community. This was a tool. Now, most of the data used to populate this, it was designed to predict the acquisition and decay of skills across a deployment life cycle for a carrier air wing, based on what we knew about how much time a student was spending on training, how effective the training environment was for acquisition of that skill, what kinds of media or instructional support were available, what kind of fidelity was available in the training environment, whether it's a specific simulator, aviation trainer, or aircraft that they're using, what its cues were, and then the baseline incidence of just lack of practice where these skills were allowed to atrophy. Now, almost all the data that populate this model was based on SME opinions, just based on the number of reports that were required. It was working, but one 3-star left, another 3-star reported, and this, I won't say it's died on the vine because it's still perfectly valid, but it is not currently being used. But I love the visual it represents. This is one example of a suite of performance evaluation tools that we have developed in the past. Now, we also have performance assessment capabilities that have made their way into the maritime fleet. In the P8, for instance, there is a tool, JD, what's it called? What's the best thing that goes in the P8 called? I know you know this.
Create.
Huh?
Create.
Thank you, Amanda.
They're my projects.
Yeah, okay. Right. Well,
It's not Brimstone?
no, that's going to be a good one too. Well, actually, this Beth Atkinson's lab has built a suite of capabilities, all of which have different names, but Create is, one of the prominent ones, designed to help automate the process of data consolidation following a P8 mission. What used to happen until Beth came along, Beth and Amanda came along.
Brian, but I just run Brian's things for him because he's too busy apparently.
Okay, all right, I'm just going to stop adding names, but like the team came along. What used to happen after a 5 to 7 hour maritime mission is that the operators in the back of the aircraft would have to spend up to 5 additional hours consolidating the data to report what had happened and what had been done well and what had been done poorly to produce what's called a purple in, I don't know, the worst designed system in the history of systems. What Create did initially is automate the process of that data consolidation, and now they're even fielding versions of this, low side conversation that can share real-time data for the tactical operators in the back of the aircraft to help them make better decisions in flight and track the quality of the decisions that they're making. It's a huge win, but I didn't have a slide about it, so I showed you a slide about something we built about 4 years ago. Anyway, those are just 2 examples of the kinds of performance assessment tools that we work on. This is another area of focus for us. So that, in a nutshell, is a summary of the kinds of things that we work on, what our command is about, how we're embedded within the larger community, and also why you should all drop out of school and become AEPs. All right.
Think about school.
Okay. Okay, you probably don't want to drop out of school, but in this market, I know you're all going to get hired as soon as you just pop your heads up like groundhogs. All right. At any rate, I'm happy to take any questions if you guys want to ask about anything except enterprise data analytics.
I'll totally jeopardize the questions if you guys
Okay.
don't. So, no, okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about your personnel selection too? Because I think that's
Oh,
really
yeah,
interesting,
okay.
If you don't mind, if you had 5 minutes on it or whatever.
Oh, no, that's fine. All right, well, I spent the first 10 years of my career doing personnel selection, as Amanda mentioned, a system called the Aviation Selection Test Battery. It's largely a measure of general cognitive ability and spatial ability and mechanical comprehension. It was, because until 2013, that's all we could measure using booklets. But we built an online test delivery platform called Automated Pilot Exam. I didn't name the network. I didn't name the test delivery tool because it's the dumbest name ever. Because it's not an exam. It's not just for pilots. It's a secure test delivery platform that should have a name anything other than Apex. But that's what it's called, and it's fielded now. But as a result of that, we're able to deliver tests that are computerized. So what we did back in 2004 and 2005. We first converted our tests from classical test theory to theta metric using item response theory, which gives us some really cool features about the test. It allows us to treat every version as though it's a parallel form of another, allows us to build computer adaptive versions, and that's what we're able to do. Once we went to the computerized form, we built a library on the backs and the blood and the sweat and the tears of about 4 years of A-Pool students. Sinatra had a problem for a long time in that they had way more students showing up seasonally than they could ever get into training. And so there would be, at any given moment, 100 to 400 students just sitting around waiting for training in Pensacola, having no idea what my name was or that I was coming for them. And for a matter of years, we were able to get data from A-Pool students that allowed us to build and parameterize a giant library of test questions, which allowed us to build a computer adaptive version of the ASTB. Another cool thing we were able to do because on this computerized platform is abandon our archaic, 50-year-old mechanical spatial apperception and spatial three-dimensional thinking metrics that were purely paper-based. What we were able to replace them with was something called the performance-based metrics battery. I didn't name it. I hate that name. But it's a measure of divided attention and multitasking where we take a COTS, HOTAS, a commercial off-the-shelf stick and throttle, and take someone who wants to be a pilot and force them to do a tracking task with the throttle, with the stick in their right hand, and then we make them do a tracking task with the throttle in their left hand, and then we make them do it at the same time, tracking two different objects. So far, nobody's angry. We then have them put those down and give them a dichotic listening measure, which is really representative of the kinds of tasks they have to do in the aircraft, since they're often listening to 3 and 4 different channels of radios. What we'll do is throw 2 different audio streams into each ear at the same time and tell them they have to cue on just one ear. And if they hear a letter in the target ear, they have to pull a trigger. If they hear a number in the target ear, they've got to hit a button with their other hand. And they don't like that. And so then we make them do all 3 tests together, and they really hate that part because no one is good at that. Really all we're able to track with that section is whether or not the examinee is able to avoid completely dropping a task. That is the wildest metric of success, but we sure as heck don't get ceiling effects on that section of the test. It works really well, and because we were able to add that kind of direct representation of spatial ability, the validity, just the raw validity of our test went way, way up. Another thing that we added a couple years later was a forced choice adaptive personality test. Now, if you think people are angry at the end of the stick and throttle task, what we force them to do in the personality test is respond to 88 statement dyads, and they've got to decide which of these statements is more representative of who they are. And the statements are matched on their social desirability. So question dyad number 1 for you is, I am a hard worker and people trust me. Which of those is more representative of who you are? A or B? B, excellent choice. Okay, question number 2. I am often accused of theft and I never loved anyone. Which of those is more representative?
More representative of me?
Yeah, you gotta pick one. You gotta pick one. Right, okay. Well, anyway, so there are 88 statement pairs, some of which are socially desirable, some of which are not. And the idea is we needed something that was resistant to intentional faking because this population of examinees is more motivated to fake good than any population on Earth. Now, I know a lot of personality researchers would say, no, it's not that bad. No, they would fake so badly, we wouldn't get validity, we wouldn't get variance. When we'd use traditional personality measures, our pilots would all get 5s on all the way down the scale. I'm perfect in every way. Well, those data are not that valuable. So this forced choice adaptive personality test that we bought from the Army, it was built with a SIBR. It gives us a little incremental predictive power. It does have some reliability issues, but we built it using our own item library, and it gives us a little R-squared change. And believe me, once you're at a validity of 0.5, any incremental validity, any R-squared change is just worth its weight in gold. Anyway, so that's what the ASTB looks like now. We've been able to add a series of toys, and what we're working on now, because I'm actually going back there in a week. I'm going back to NAMI, and the ASTB is my problem again, starting in 2 weeks. We're upgrading the test delivery platform. Right now, the test is given at about 260 locations around the world, but it's a client-based tool, which means we've got to install something on your computer. Okay, these computers are all owned by the Navy. You see the problem? Okay, so we're able to get it installed on people's computers, but it's a giant hassle and it often doesn't work, and it's permissions based. The next version of the automated pilot exam, best name ever, is going to be exclusively web-based. There's going to be no software to install on your client whatsoever, meaning we can deploy it wherever we want, and we're not even going to talk to your MID. We're not even going to let them know we're there. We're just going to give this test to who we need to give it to, and your IT can just go hassle somebody else.
And on the back end, you get to collect all the data.
Yeah, I mean, we still control where the test is given. We can see where it's being administered, but we won't have to install any software on the client terminals, which I'm very, very happy about. Anyway, so that's the 5-minute song and dance I have about personnel selection. I thought I was done with it. I thought I was never going to work on that stuff again, but here we are. At any rate, I really appreciate your time and attention. If you need to know more about what NAWCTSD does, you're going to have to ask somebody else, because I don't work here anymore. But I'm happy to have been able to come. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Okay.